أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear brothers and sisters, inshallah. Welcome to the course. It's a new course that begins today, and I'm going to be teaching it once a week, entitled Walāyah. Now, some people usually read it as Walāyah, but we'll understand a bit, once we delve into this whole course, we'll understand why it has been spelt in different ways. So some have spelt it as Walāyah, some have spelt it as Walāyah. And there's a reason for that. The specific word Walāyah is able to change its meaning and take a different form based on its pronunciation and based on its usage. And we'll get into that in more detail, inshallah, as we progress throughout the course. Now, the nature of this course is going to be, in a sense, very analytical. So it is an advanced course. It's not a simple course. But that shouldn't deter anyone from, continuing and wanting to pursue this topic. Because I'm going to try as much as I can to simplify things. We have PowerPoints, we have slides, we have notes. There's always going to be supplemental readings as well. So that's also something that will assist in reading. And then the discussions that we have and the questions and answers will also clarify anything that's not clear. So nobody should be discouraged. It's going to seem a bit academic, a bit complicated, but it's beautiful ideas, beautiful thoughts. It's a central theme in the Islamic worldview. Walāyah is essential to Islamic thought. God in the Quran speaks about Walāyah and mentions it over 200 times in the Quran. There's Walāyah as relationships between individuals. It seems like it's a central concept and a key word in the Quranic worldview. And what I'm going to do at the beginning is I'm going to discuss the theory of Toshihiko Izutsu when it comes to language. Izutsu was a Japanese professor, and he wrote a number of books on language and the Quran. So one of the main books that he has is God and Man in the Quran. And another book that he has is Ethical Religious Concepts in the Quran. These are very essential to read and understand, because he presents a theory which allows us to understand the Quran as a whole, not dealing with words in a specific way. It's more of presenting a holistic understanding of the Quranic language and the Quranic usage. So we'll get into all of that soon, inshallah. Today I just wanted to give a brief introduction to the topic, and maybe we can even go into Izutsu's theory to start out with it, and then inshallah after that we can continue with the theory and then delve into the topic of Walāyah directly. So the topic of Walāyah, because of its centrality in Islamic thought, we see that it developed throughout the history of Islam in many different ways. So what the Quran does is the Quran comes and brings new concepts, brings words to the world. Because human beings understand the world through language. We talk to each other through language. We deal with each other through language. Every day we express things with language, and we choose specific words for that. Now, a linguistic system, if you go into linguistics, it's really an expression of the collective mind of the society. So when you look at a language, the words that are used, not just the words, even the grammatical rules, are a reflection of that nation's mindset. They're a reflection of its understanding, of its depthness, of its shallowness. And this is something that linguists have done a lot of work on. They've dealt with this topic. So we won't get too much into that. In the Islamic world, in the Hujjah at least, there have been discussions on language as well. Because the Quran is a book of language. It's the word of God. And it descended in the form of speech, and specifically in the Arabic language. So God was using a language that was already established by the Arabs. And the Arabs were poets, and they were very eloquent in their expressions. And a lot of linguists, when they try to understand the Arabic language and the way they would describe things, for example, when they have many different descriptions for one thing, like a lion, there's over 7 or 8 ways to describe a lion, words for the lion. It's not just lion. Depending on what you're trying to describe in that lion, you use that specific word. And the horse is the same thing. There's over 10 descriptions or words for a horse in the Arabic language because of it being that rich language that likes to describe things in detail. Now also, the way they use the past tense, the future tense, and all these different grammatical rules, it also expresses how important language was to the Arabs. But we're not going to go into that, but we just want to understand that language is the collective mind of the society. And because it's that, the words in that language and the phrases that are used by those people really express their mode of thought. So let's take a contemporary example right now. If we look at our society right now, we see that there's a lot of words that are thrown around, especially when there's political debates and campaigns going on. Specific words are chosen. And even in the media or in any attempt to manipulate people's minds or motivate them or change them, you definitely choose specific words to use. Not because those words in themselves have a specific meaning. It's what we associate with those words. So for example, if somebody comes and says that freedom is essential for every human being, it's an essential right. It's a human right. It's a universal human right, freedom. If you mention that in America, there are specific things that we understand about freedom. You know, we think that freedom is related to freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and you know, everything associated with the concept of freedom. And there's this debate now whether gender identification or anything of that sort is also part of this freedom of choice as well, or not. The right to have guns, for example. You know, I have to have the freedom to be able to own a gun. I mean, that's also a debate that we have in our contemporary scene. But let's say you go into another country. Let's say you go to eastward, maybe Europe or Asia, and you say that, you know, humans are supposed to be free. Freedom is part of their universal rights. They would understand freedom in a different way. So let's say here in America, we have a child that wants to get married. The father basically, I mean, how the culture understands it over here, for a child to be free, he must have his own choice in choosing his spouse and choosing who he wants to be with in his life. If you go to a more Eastern country, that let's say the marital system there is not really included in that freedom of choice. So they believe in freedom, but they don't believe that the child's right to choose a spouse for himself is part of that freedom. They believe that, in fact, that's something that's harmful for that individual. So it's true that it's the same word that's used here and used there, but there are different understandings and different comprehensions of this concept. If you go to the Christian creed or the Muslim Islamic creed, any religious creed, and you talk about freedom in that, you know, freedom, according to the Christian, and this is very general, is to live a Christ-like life, to be free of sins. So freedom in the Christian context or the religious context is connected to another word. It's not dependent on its own. It's connected to the word sin, for example. So to be free is to be free of sins, to be free of attachment to this world, to be free of the dominion or the control of Satan. That's what freedom is. But come to a secular individual and you tell him freedom, that will never cross his mind. The word freedom is associated to other concepts and other ideas. So freedom will basically be connected to things like the freedom of speech, for example. So I can say whatever I want. Or the freedom of acting. doing whatever he wants as long as it doesn't harm anyone else. And this was the libertarian view when libertarianism was first proposed after the Renaissance. This was the idea that a person should be able to do whatever he wants to do as long as it doesn't harm anyone else. This was the condition. So this is what the ultimate freedom is according to their thought. Again, a religious individual will not accept that. He'll say, no, freedom should not be allowing the individual to do whatever he wants. Because once you define freedom that way, then the soul that's in the human being will rebel. And because it's inclined towards evil, inclined towards doing wrong things, then if you give it the ability to do that and you just normalize it, then that's what it's going to go after. And then you're going to destroy society. And what this freedom really did for you is it made you imprisoned to your desires and sins and things and whatnot. But obviously a secular, maybe atheist individual will not accept that argument. So again, words play a very big role in determining how we think and then influencing how we act. So people move to protect healthcare as a universal right in the US. Why? Because they believe that this is an essential right. So once you form a conception of something, that word universal right, sacrifice, for example, these things that you connect with this word, patriotism, people are patriotic. What does that entail? Once you say I'm patriotic, it's not just a word that you throw out there. It comes with a lot of different notions and ideas connected to it. And that influences the way you behave. So once you define a word in a certain way, it doesn't just change the definition. It changes the definition, and usually it motivates and influences action. So this is why in the Quran, or when Islam came, one of the main objectives of the Prophet was to come and alter the linguistic system of the society. They understood life in a certain way, they defined God in a certain way, and what Islam came to do, or what the Prophet attempted to do at the beginning, was to begin changing the linguistic system of the Arabs by connecting words to other words that they weren't previously connected to, by adding or redefining certain definitions so that they fit with the Islamic worldview and change the attitude of the Arabs towards life. So let's say the Arabs were tribal individuals, and they were known for their courage, and they were known for their generosity, and they were known for their loyalty to their tribes. So when you would tell an Arab about, back, in the Arab paganism era, about loyalty, their loyalty was to their tribe. They understood that you would defend your family member or your tribe member with your life. Because if you do that, then you're a courageous individual. You're a warrior, you're a brave warrior. So being a warrior entailed positive notions such as courage, such as loyalty to your tribe. If someone wasn't loyal to his tribe got attacked, and someone decides that, what, I think my tribe was wrong in this, I'm not going to really defend them, and he doesn't defend them, they're going to consider this guy as being a coward or disloyal. So loyalty was connected to tribe. So when you tell someone, I praise loyalty, or I'm in defense of loyalty, you tell that to the Arab Bedouins back then, obviously they would understand that that means I should defend my tribe no matter what happens. And that was part of their culture, part of their society, part of their understanding of life in the world. And even in our lives now, we have notions like that. So for example, a notion of honor, let's say in Arab cultures, or Indian or Pakistani cultures, when it comes to marriage, the wife is your honor. So once you call her your honor, or your dignity, then you would deal with that woman differently in society. Just by calling her that, it changes our attitude towards women in the society. Not if you go to very conservative countries, a man cannot speak with someone that's not his wife, let alone someone else's wife, because that's his honor, that's his dignity. So you use specific words, and in some cultures you're not even allowed to name the wife of that individual. You call them, how's your family doing? And what you mean by family is your wife. I had some friends from Sudan, and they called the wife awlad. كيف أولادك, they say. How are your children? Or أولاد meaning like your family. You know, in Lebanon and other cultures also they use the word كيف العائلة, عائلة. How's your family? You know, to kind of preserve the purity of the woman and, you know, her honor and dignity and whatnot. So you can't even refer to her by her name. So this notion of honor and dignity is connected to hiding your woman and protecting them from this kind of stuff. You come to a different culture and you come to the US and you say, you know, my wife is my honor. What would an American understand from that? They wouldn't understand anything related to not allowing a man talking to her. You know, honor here has a whole different meaning. It's related to other concepts, other notions, other ideas. So if you want to come and change a mentality or change the behavior of individuals, you have to come and, first of all, target the language system. You start connecting notions and ideas and words to honor. That way, when the individual, when you say honor, then the individual, his mind automatically goes to everything associated with honor. So not because these are not associated, then he doesn't get that idea. So he doesn't have a problem talking to your wife. You know, you have a very let's say a very conservative individual comes from a very conservative country over here. And the neighbor comes and wants to say hi to his wife. He sees her outside in the backyard and, you know, says, hey, good morning, you know, and then the man hears him in the house, you know, he comes out and he wants to kill this guy. And, you know, this guy's, I'm saying hi to her. What's wrong with that? You can't talk to my wife. You just stepped over my honor and dignity. Like, that guy will have no idea what on earth this guy is saying. Because the whole concept is not in his mind. It's not part of his language. It's not part of the collective mindset of the society. So the reason why Walāyah has been chosen as a subject is because I think it's been rarely explored as a notion from this aspect. I've looked through a lot of books and articles. In the Western world, Walāyah is usually associated with Sufism because you have the system of sainthood, and it's translated in Sufi thought, in English at least, as sainthood. That's the most common word translated. Now again, the problem with translation. Why isn't there an equivalent of Walāyah in English? Because the word Walāyah doesn't have any meaning. The Arabic term, the Quranic term, has no equivalent in the English language because it didn't develop in the English world. It's not part of the collective mindset of the Western world. Walāyah developed as a notion, as a concept in the Arabic world, in the Muslim world, and it's a notion that Islam invented. So it's directly connected to the Islamic worldview. That's why it doesn't have a meaning outside of the Islamic world. That's why it doesn't have an equivalent. Another example is the word infallible. If you look in Shiism, you say that the Imam is infallible. Well, infallible is not an exact equivalent of isma. Infallibility is related to the Christian church, and they understand the Christian church being infallible in a very different sense than what isma is in Shiism, what it entails. So again, if we take isma, and we're going to show this in diagrams, like how we have keywords, we have focus words, we have concepts connected to each other. So let's take isma as an example. In Shiism, if you say isma, things that are connected to that are things such as divine knowledge. So having access to divine knowledge. Isma meaning never being oblivious or oblivious of God. Always being aware, God wary. That's isma. Never committing a sin. That's isma. So a lot of notions connected to isma in Arabic. When you come to English, infallibility isn't necessarily connected to that divine transmission, the transmission of the divine knowledge through an imam. It's not connected to that. It's not related to that. There's no conception of Nabi or Imam when it comes to infallibility. So that's why it's even difficult to translate such a term. You have to come and translate it, but then you explain it. So some people, translate isma as infallibility. Some translate it as a ma'soom, as an inerrant individual. He does not commit error. But that still doesn't really grasp the whole concept. It's not just that he doesn't only commit sin or error. It's that he on top of not committing any sin. Why doesn't he commit any sin? It's because he's so connected to God and living one with God that he cannot even commit sins. And on top of that, because of him living in the divine presence, he's able to understand what God wants all the time. Whether it was through his spirit or through Ruh al-Qudus, as the Holy Spirit, as we have in our ahadith. So you say Ma'soom, that's what it entails. These are all connected to it. Infallibility and errancy doesn't have that connection. What is the closest term we have in English? So, Walāyah in Sufism, at least in the English world, has been translated as sainthood. This is the main translation. But if you open up any book on Walāyah, even in Sufism, you would find that the first thing they would say is that this term cannot be translated. We have no equivalent in the English language for this word. But the closest they have in Sufi thought is sainthood, because Walāyah is connected to the saint, to the qutb, to the master, the Shaykh of the tariqah. This is what Walāyah is that divine knowledge that the wali receives from God. So sainthood makes sense for them. But when it comes to Shi'ism is much broader than that. Walāyah in Shi'ism is a concept related to the whole being, the whole of being, whole of existence. The beginning of existence till the end of existence is connected to the system of Walāyah. It's not, and the Imam being the wali is just one part of that system. And so it's not correct to translate it as sainthood when it comes to this, to Shi'i thought at least, or even the Quranic understanding of Walāyah. Sainthood won't make sense. And we'll see why. We'll go to the definition presented by the Quran, and we'll see how the Quran presents Walāyah as this relationship between different parties and individuals, and therefore we cannot just confine it to that one definition. And we'll see how the Imams use the concept to build a community that is made up of people of different levels of understanding and different levels of spiritual capacities, and then understand how this is related to the hereafter as well and our duty in this world. Then what we're going to do after that, so first of all we're going to talk about Izutsu's theory of language and how he uses it and applies it to the Quran. That will be the first thing that we're going to do. And I'm going to provide supplementary material readings for us to kind of review and read before the class. It helps us understand the idea that because we only have like an hour per class or even less than that. So these extra readings, if you read them and you prepare before class, you'll be able to grasp the material in a much better way. So we're going to start with Izutsu's theory. And then that will be for a few sessions. And then we will delve into Walāyah linguistically, in the language, in the Arabic language. Once we see Izutsu's theory, we'll start understanding different ways of defining things. So that will become clear when it's defined in a certain way, connected to language only. And then in the Quranic system, it has a different definition. And then we will move into how it was used in the narrations of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. We'll go through Al-Kafi, the second volume and the first volume, the Hadith, and we'll see how the Imams were building slowly and gradually a community with the wali being the center of this community, and why he's the center of the community, and how that idea came to be. Is it something that's in conformity with the Quran, or is it something that the Imams developed on their own? We'll kind of also deal with that as well. And we'll see what that entails. It's very interesting. It'll become very interesting because it connects so many different notions together. Things that you thought were separate and didn't make any sense will become connected in this course. After that, we'll go into the mystics and how they took the concept and term of Walāyah. Sufis obviously believe that they took their teachings from Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. Almost every Sufi order goes back to the Imams, right? So again, why does it go back to the Imams? Because the Imam is the wali. So this Walāyah, again, we find it manifesting in Sufi thought. Okay, Urafa in Shi'ism, they call them Urafa. They're also, in a way, a spiritual way for Sufism. They just name them differently for specific reasons. They've also dealt with Walāyah. But because the Arif is a Shi'i as well, and not like a Sunni Sufi, is a Shi'i Arif, the concept of Walāyah in that school of thought would differ from Sufism as well. Because Shiism doesn't just take the Imam as a spiritual guide. It takes him also as a temporal guide or vicegerent also, like a leader in the outside world. So because of that connection, again, even in the realm of spiritual wayfaring, the notion differs from Sufism, because Sufism is lacking that notion that's connected to it. So they're similar in one sense, and they differ in another sense. So how does the wali, being the Imam himself, ever present, being the leader of the nation, spiritually, esoterically, and exoterically, how does that influence spiritual wayfaring in this world? How does it differ from just regular Sufism that doesn't understand it? Is there any difference, or there's no difference at all? So we'll explore that after that. And the final thing that we're going to go through is we'll see how this notion of Walāyah was transferred to jurisprudence. The schools of fiqh also took the notion of there being a wali, and this wali being in charge of the nation, and this wali either having some spiritual superiority over other people or not, and how this wilayah, is manifesting in regular human beings. So the wali, let's say, is the marja a wali or not? Is he a hakim? Does he have wilayah? Wilayah tashri'iyya, for example. They divide them into wilayah tashri'iyya, wilayah hakimiyya, wilayah takwiniyya, all these different types of wilayahs. Why were they categorized into these ways? Why did the fuqaha or the jurists separate between different types of wilayahs? So if the imam has wilayah, is wilayah one reality, that if you have one, then you have all of them together? Or is it something that you can dissect and separate? You can have part of the wilayah, but not the other part. So this is something that the scholars have differed over as well. So if you're a Nabi, and you have wilayah from God, then do you have wilayah takwiniyah? Do you have wilayah dominion over existence or not? And if you do you have also wilayah tashri'iyya, basically dominion or authority over divine legislations? Can the Prophet come and legislate whatever he wants? And then God will approve that legislation because the Prophet decided he wants it? Or is the Prophet's duty only to transmit the message? Even though he's a wali, he lacks the wilayah tashri'iyya. This is a debate that they had as well. Because, separating between these different categories, is that possible? Or is wilayah one reality where they're not separable? It's like you're dividing, a body of water into different sections, but it's one water. So water is water, wilayah is wilayah. Whatever you put, the division that you put, they're just artificial. They're not real division. Others say no, wilayah is not to be understood this way. Wilayah is, in this sense, is very different than wilayah in that sense. God can give a person wilayah takwiniyah, but not wilayah tashri'iyya. So some of the scholars believe that the imams only have wilayah takwiniyah, that they have dominion and authority over existence, but they don't have wilayah tashri'iyya. They can't legislate. The imam's duty is only to express what God or the Prophet ﷺ legislated. Others say they don't have both. Neither the wilayah tashri'iyya nor the wilayah takwiniyya. They just have wilayah hakimiyya. They just have authority over individuals when they want to govern them. So these are things that we're going to delve with at the end. And I think it's going to become very interesting to see how this notion that has no precedence before came into Islam, was developed by Islam, and it shapes all of our relationships and understanding of existence, and it influences our behavior as well. So, inshallah, we'll go into that in the next few days. I wanted to give a very brief introduction today. We started a bit late because there was some technical difficulties, but inshallah that's not an issue. Okay, so I'm not sure if this is not viewable here on the PowerPoint, but they're going to have it done next week. The slides show on the recording of the Zoom session. So I'm not going to go through many different slides. I'm just going to go through one or two just to introduce Izutsu. That way tomorrow, if you prepare the readings for the next session, next week, you'll kind of already have delved into it a little bit. Next week, I'll provide, in the next few days, a reading for next week. You guys can read it. Then you come to class prepared. We'll talk about Izutsu's theory, introduce it, and it's going to be very interesting. We're going to talk about how the Arabs worshipped before Islam. Their understanding of God, their understanding of the world, how Islam came and changed all these equations, and how the Quran was directly speaking to these individuals. A lot of verses will start getting understood in a different way. The Quran becomes more lively because we'll start seeing how the Quran was speaking about specific people that were talking to the Prophet and they were living in a certain way. The Quran was addressing that directly. So once we give that reality to the Quran, we start understanding how the Prophet was trying to alter the behavior of individuals. And he only had a short span of time. So once we see what he did to these guys, what they believed in and how ingrained they were in their beliefs, and how the Prophet was able to alter that and change it in such a short period of time, we begin to understand how amazing the Prophet was in terms of being able to make such a drastic transformation in the minds and the hearts of people in such a short period of time. That in itself is astonishing. Now obviously, after he passed away, a lot of people went back to their old behaviors. And we see that reflecting in Karbala, reflecting after the Prophet's demise, where people begin, even the Imams were describing them as, you have the old traits of Jahiliyyah still in you. You haven't gotten rid of them. But during the Prophet's presence, he was able to transform so many things in the human beings that he created this whole movement which still exists until this day in a very short span of time. And that'll be very interesting, inshallah. Okay, so we'll begin with Izutsu, his definition of semantics, and then inshallah next week we'll pick up from here. We'll go into the diagrams and the graphs that we have. Hopefully the projector will be working. If not, I'll print the documents and pass them out. You guys can write on the PowerPoint slides notes, inshallah. So Izutsu describes semantics as an analytical study of the key terms of a language with a view to arriving eventually at a conceptual grasp of the Weltanschauung, or the worldview, of the people who use that language as a tool, not only of speaking and thinking, but more important still, of conceptualizing and interpreting the world that surrounds them. So the slides, I'm going to provide you guys with the slides, so you don't have to, this is a long definition. So basically, he's saying that semantics is the study, analytical study of the key terms of a language. So we understand from this that a language has key terms. And what semantics does is it deals with these key terms. It studies them, analyzes them, in order to understand the worldview of that language, basically. Not only as a tool of speaking and thinking, but of conceptualizing and interpreting the world around you. So this is what language is, basically. Words do not stand in isolation from one another. They are interdependent. And they derive their concrete meanings precisely from the entire system of relations. And then Izutsu divides meaning into two different categories. I'm going to write them on the board here since the slides are not on the PowerPoint. Let's see if this is here. Okay, so let me erase this. So meaning, there are two basically categories for meaning. You have a basic meaning, then you have relational meanings. So these are independent and relational. All right, so these are obviously, this is self-defining, relational, basically independent and relational here. So you have words that the meaning is self. Either is the basic meaning for a word, or the word has a relational meaning. These are two different ways of looking at different words in language. The example that Izutsu gives is kitab. And because he's dealing with the Quranic worldview and semantic fields, semantic field of language in the Quran, he's using Quranic terms to explain his meanings. So he has the word kitab. Kitab, which in Arabic would be kitab. And he comes and tries to show what he means when he divides meaning into basic and relational meanings. He says, let's take kitab as an example. Kitab in itself, if we look at the basic meaning of kitab, it means a book, plainly. So basically the papers that are within a binding, that's what kitab means. So if you say the word kitab, the first thing that comes to your mind is just any book, random, not a specific book. But if you come to the Quran and you find the word Ahlul Kitab, what does that mean? What does Ahlul Kitab mean? The people of the book. Is it still an ambiguous notion? No. So Kitab, in its essence, in its original meaning, does not contain anything regarding Ahl, people. It doesn't have that connected to it. But if you put Kitab in the Quran, and he draws this diagram, Izutsu, he has this connected to notions such as Ahl. He has Nabi. He has Wahi, Tanzil Allah. So here, he has Wahi here. Let's erase the date. Tanzil Allah, basically. So he has all these in squares like this. And all of this is one semantic field. So he draws circles to represent these semantic fields. And then there's relationships between these different words over here that he draws. And they're not too important right now to get them all complete, but I believe that's basically what he has here. So if you look at the semantic field of the Quran, kitab does not exist independently. Independently would mean ignoring all this stuff over here. Kitab. What kind of kitab does he have? When you say al-kitab in the Quran, you're referring to the Quran. So giving the Quran the term kitab, the word kitab, referring to the Quran as al-kitab, what does it do to the human mind? So now in the Islamic world, when you say al-kitab, al-kitab al-mubarak, what comes to your mind? The Quran. So it's as if what the Quran did was it manipulated people's mind in a positive way, not a negative way. And it made kitab, the word that just meant a regular book, it gave the Quran such a position where there's no other book except for the Quran. It has dominion over all other books. So al-kitab is the Quran, whereas before it was just a regular book. So when you refer to that in the Islamic world, and this happens by altering the language system of a nation. It's connected to Nabi Nazal al-Kitab. The Wahi is connected to the Nabi, so therefore the Wahi is connected to the Kitab as well. The Kitab is Munazzal. So when you say Kitab, it's descending from a different realm. This Tanzil, the specific word, it's not a Kitab that was given or written or invented. The Quran deals with these Arabs, they come and say, this is something that the Prophet came up with. The Quran uses the word هو الذي نزل الكتاب. Why it's specifically using the word nazala instead of allafa, like authored or wrote? Nazala, to put in the minds of the people that this book is descending, or it descended from a different realm. This is not a book from amongst you. This is not a book that's the same as the book that you have. This is a book that has descended. So once you put that into people's minds, you hold the Quran, you deal with the Quran, you're always dealing with a book that's descended from heaven, or descended from the realm of the unseen. So connecting the word kitab to these different words and notions, and also connecting kitab to Allah, basically, at the end of the day. Hada kitabullah. God has a book now. Whereas if you come in English and you say the word book, these meanings don't come with it, because it's not part of the language system that they have. So this is what he does. He comes and he begins showing the relationships between words. And then he goes into the semantic fields in more detail, basically drawing diagrams where you have focus words. This is very terrible. And then you have keywords, basically. So these are, here, I'll write this better. So he says that the Quran is made up of a number of focus words, and every focus word is connected to other keywords. Not every keyword is a focus word, but there are main words that the Quran uses, and it develops its language system using these keywords and using these focus words and keywords, and then begins to develop relationships between different semantic fields and different linguistic systems. So we're going to go in exploring, and then we're going to find that there's going to be a keyword here, keyword here, keyword here, and then you might have an overlap of another focus word with other keywords, and so on and so forth. So once you say here, let's say kitab is a focus word here, or let's say Allah, for example, being a focus word, and one notion connected to Allah, let's say, is kitab. Once you say God, in the Islamic understanding, the immediate thought that comes to your mind, or a notion that's connected to God, is a book. God has books in Islam. Go to Buddhism, that doesn't exist. You say God in Buddhism, it doesn't come to the mind of an individual that this God has a book. He's not an author in Buddhism. He might be the author of the world in existence, but not specifically a book. But in Islamic semantic field, Allah and kitab are connected. Now kitab might be connected to another focus word. Let's say here, guidance. Guidance, for example, hidayah. The kitab, it guides you, basically. And so on and so forth. Now this is just an example. I'm not trying to say that this is a keyword or focus word. I'm just trying to give an example of how these language systems become built and how these relationships between words become repeated in a way that they become concrete in the human's minds. And then the Islamic civilization becomes influenced and then starts growing and building based on the words and the language system that the Prophet introduced by God in the Quran. So inshallah, next week we'll begin introducing this theory in detail. We'll talk about this. We'll try to see how language plays an essential role in people's minds and thoughts and their worldview. And this is important because we want to understand what Walāyah did. When it was introduced, how it was introduced, what are the notions that the Prophet or the Quran connected it with, what does it entail to believe in Walāyah, and then how the Islamic scholars and historians and jurists and mystics took this concept and further developed it, and were able to build let's say the mystics, a whole spiritual understanding of the world based on Walāyah. Very different from other schools of like Hinduism or Buddhism. They have a different way of spiritually traveling to God, not through Walāyah, through other means. So how does that Walāyah differ from those other schools? So we'll end that over here inshallah, and we'll continue next week. Walhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa ala ahli bayti at-tayyibin at-tahirin.